Still no makeup, but my caregiver always puts my hair in braids so that it's like hot. It makes it feel better. So more on the forum, there were also homicide confessions as well. There were plans to murder a bunch of homeless people. And let me tell you something. This is not very Enneagram 6 of me to like reveal this information, like people could like retaliate on me or whatever, but they'd be in big trouble because I'm a dependent adult and it's a higher felony, but the reason why, I started like oversharing the stuff was I have my sexual assault trauma triggered very badly by stuff being covered up. It reminded me of how my parents framed me as schizophrenic to police officers, and people were saying all kinds of untrue stuff about me. That really triggered my own self. I've shown videos and text messages of how my parents are, and there are people who have met my parents in person from distant typology communities, and my friend Rebecca is right, like the whole like proving thing is the effect gaslighting has had on me. I don't doubt my reality. I've always said I don't doubt my reality, and she didn't say this part, but like the whole like it makes me desperate for people to see because of what they've done. They've like manipulated other people. You know, um, you know, I decided. Like I dealt with my father telling me that I hallucinated his abuse. Like in front of some of my online friends when they've been on calls. Like my fatherly figure, Vap, the matter that I suck older men as a teenager should tell you like how serious, my problems are with my parents. Like he had been on a call and he had been talking to my father, he was trying to like make him a better father. But my father said that like he never said anything, and just like 5 minutes earlier, he had said that stuff in like in front of that. That's what my parents did to me. They're very abusive. They're very abusive, and it has a lot to do with why I was oversharing and dumping online. Low side of two other reasons. It's just the type of abuse that I've been subjected to. I've been subjected to almost every kind of abuse, but that was very chronic and it triggered my image issues. Um, so yeah, that's why I wanted to wait like a year or more to like be making these types of videos. But because of how triggered my trauma was, I was very dysregulated. It made me lose emotional control, and this started. So yeah, there were homicide confessions, there were homicide plans, you know, um, there were plans to murder homeless people, with users, and that's concerning because, if they did that, homeless people often like lack people to like know where they are. So that's a lot easier to get away with, and that's very, very concerning. That's very concerning stuff. The forum had so much stuff that is appalling, unacceptable, very inappropriate for a typology community in any place in general, and you guys have no idea. It was really bad. I have no idea what CB was aware of, and I believe she went about things in toxic ways. But if she really was aware of these things, I really do not blame her for having wanted to take the forum down. I don't know her motivations, but I can hardly blame her if she was aware of all these things going on. And I did not want the forum, or other people did not want the forum to get taken down. The plan was just to like have things change for maybe move forward to not be the site owner anymore so that he like sells it or something. That was not the plan. Me and others did not want to lose our writing, like we wanted things backed up. I wanted things backed up for other users as well, you know. So, like the stuff on the forum, like there's a lot of stuff that is appalling information. And with me as an IEE, like if you knew like how I like reacted to information in this certain situation, you would see that my TI is in not only the dimension of experience but also norms. Um Honestly, with Ashura, I could accept myself as a EII. However, that system, they School of Classical Socionics has renovated things so that it's no longer Ashura's original work by itself, but a lot of Ashura's ideas are probably outdated because she, continued to develop her views over time. She actually endorsed Valentina Megid's work. She actually said that the future of socionics belongs there. So, things evolve over time and change in their form. So, and socionics is far from being a completed system. It has some hard laws that have been established in it, but over time things will refine with it. And it's going to continue to evolve. Something better will come around until eventually, it works and is established. So that's something to really consider here. Me as an extrovert is just bad. Like my stress responses are extroverted, but that is actually typical for introverts to become extroverted under stress. You have John Beebe's model, you have Enneagram that shows that as well. Even Carl Jung also believed that himself. So, I've been under extreme stress in the past year. I've moved 8 times. I had to pee and poop in a bucket. That by itself didn't bother me as much, other than when the maggots got there. But the way my parents were lying to workers about having no money to put me in a hotel is what really set me off. I dealt with Eunice bringing her husband, back in there with no door in my room. I woke up with text messages on my phone I did not send and a sore crotch. And I thought that I could have been raped. And I learned from the doctor that I no longer have a hymen. And, a few years back, I had my vagina examined and I did have my hymen intact. And nothing had really changed. Over time, maybe the hymen becomes thinner, yoga, but I never really did intensive stretches with yoga that would have put that pressure on there. But maybe just over time it snapped. I mean, I'm hypermobile, but I had my vagina looked at recently at a urologist and I do not have the hypermobility in my vagina. It's just, certain places, I'm going to take off my bracelet here, you know, I'm very hypermobile. But yeah, like besides then, I've dealt with extreme stress in the past year. I aged out of a program. I got back into contact with my abusive mom and dad. They've treated me awfully in front of FS92 when I had to go to them for Christmas because a caretaker wouldn't be there and I was not yet in this program. Like they abused me in front of him. They said that my father called me names, said bitch and a cunt. He said that I deserved to get kidnapped by a homeless person. He lunged at me physically to harm me, like as if he was going to. And for me going off to get water. Like I wasn't, this is why I am not an Enneagram 6. I'm way too trusting of people and stuff outside of CPTSD triggers. I went off to go get water. So my father in a very abusive way was protecting me out of his 8 core, that I could get like kidnapped. So he's like trying to toughen me up. But like I just went to get the water because I have trauma with my parents, my mom medicating my food. So I don't drink water around them. So I wanted to get water because I hadn't had it in hours. And I was not thinking, so I went to go get the water. And then when I come back, my father did that. And my mom was focused on me humiliating people, like how it was so rude for me to take off. and people were giving me dirty looks for leaving them with the luggages. And then when I, reacted back to my father doing that, I was called abusive. And then my parents, my mom called my father just blowing off steam. Those are the double standards I've been subjected to in my family, and worse than that. Very bad family dynamics. My sister sexually harassed me, and my mom just told her, don't do that again. And then, like me crying and screaming in response with past trauma I've had sexually being triggered. She hit me. She threatened to put me in a psych ward and yelled at me and got in my face. A long time ago, I had a video of that. You know, it's just really, I'm not going to get into all that. It's really bad. But yeah, but the forum stuff, just a lot of stuff people are unaware of. You know, more than 10 users were aware of this whole thing, and a handful were involved in getting information. I'm really not going to give specifics.